Hi, you're watching a very special recording of Agenda AWANI. It's not always that I get to talk about very pertinent international issues with a very eminent international thought leader and speaker. So I'm very, very proud, and thanks to Sime Darby Plantation, Sir Jonathon Porritt. Sir Jonathon is beside me right now. I couldn't believe it. You know, I've come across some of your writings before. I've heard you, thanks to YouTube and stuff, talking as a broadcaster, and as the independent sustainability advisor to Sime Darby Plantation, you have a lot of roles to be combined and the wisdom used for the fight for palm oil. But I want to dial it back a little. This is an era of the fourth industrial revolution. This is an era where change happened faster than the combination of the first, second, and third industrial revolution. This is an era where a 16-year-old girl speaks more sense than the greatest leader of the greatest powerful nation on earth, called United States of America. So, in a day where Greta Thunberg makes more sense than a president in the White House, I'm going to come to you like that today, because I think you have worn so many hats that this question warrants you to answer it well. Why is it that you have said that you have never felt the intensity of both hope and despair at the same time? Because I think a lot of Malaysians, even in the era of what we like to call the new Malaysia, Malaysia Baru, feel the same way, but for many other things. But you were saying that for sustainability and the future of mankind and Earth.
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult combination to live with, to be honest, personally and professionally. It's hard.
Right.
And I suppose that it goes back to the fact that I have been involved in this world for 45 years. So I started reading about the environment and sustainability in the early 1970s. And I've watched these big global concerns about climate change, about biodiversity, pollution, plastics, all of these things. I've watched them get a bit worse, and then a bit worse, and then a bit worse. And I've studied the political response to all of these things. And to be honest, over the last 40 years, our combined political response has been hopelessly inadequate.
Right. Yeah.
So now, 2019, we find ourselves in a really seriously difficult position, because there are these two massive, great crises that we face now. The first, accelerating climate change, things getting worse and worse from the perspective of the climate instability. And the second is to do with biodiversity, ecosystems, threat to natural functions, land, oceans, atmospheric, etc. These are two sides of the same coin. They're both massive challenges, and you've mentioned the quality of leadership in some parts of the world, and it is so poor that people need to be worried, because this moment right now demands the highest quality political leadership, and we don't really have that globally.
I would like to quote from a movie, ironically, about, you know, how an alien superior race came to Earth wanting to punish mankind and wipe mankind off because we have not done justice to Earth. So, based on that, there's a line in there where a Nobel Prize winning scientist said, it's when mankind is pushed to the brink, to the edge, to the precipice, that mankind will come out with solution out of innovation. He said now that we have the biggest technological advantage ever in the history of mankind. However, if that is not partnered together with great leadership, political will, and it keeps looking like that's not going to happen anytime soon. The trade wars, for example, mankind seems to be able to fight better than to come together. But there's only one planet Earth. So you have been featured in the media as aligning yourself to the young people who are rebelling against their future being robbed by the current global leadership, who refuse, if I can put it that way, who refuse to acknowledge the science of climate change and still doing the things that they are doing.
Yeah.
Okay, we always talk about problems, but what would be the best solution in your point of view? Because if there's social media now, why can't we use populist social media pressure, for example, to punish these leaders at the ballot box? As somebody who, was there in the Ecology Party, Malaysia don't even have a Green Party, but you were there in the 70s with the Ecology Party.
Not very successfully, by the way, but I did stand...
You were ahead of your time.
Ahead of our time. Yes. I am very focused now on the influence of young people on these political processes, because they see it differently. They can see that their future really is at risk. And they can also listen to the scientists, because it's the scientists who are telling us all, young and old alike, that we probably only got 10, 15 years max to do the things we need to do. So for young people, that is like saying, okay, that is now the mandate, informed by the best possible science, and now we need the political actions to flow from it. And of course, they're very alert to how exciting some of these policy responses would be. Getting rid of our dependence on fossil fuels, on coal, oil and gas, sounds really bad. But when you look at the new technologies available to us in terms of renewable energy, energy efficiency, smart grids, storage technology, this is the future. Fossil fuels represent the prosperity of the past, but these technologies speak of a very different, very dynamic future. They know that if we use our tax policy properly, we know that we can bring about an accelerated transformation. So we don't pay for all the carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases we stick into the atmosphere. But in a good market economy, we should pay for the things that are causing social problems. So young people look at this and they say, well, this isn't the end of the world. This is just a passport into a very different world, very dynamic world, much more IT enabled. So big data, machine learning, all of these new insights around the fourth industrial revolution will help drive that transformation process. So for them, it's not just now, because if we don't do it now, it's going to be too late, but it's also, we want the upside.
One of the key lessons learned might be how not to lose the awareness and perception war. Because, for example, palm oil, there's a convoluted way and platform of so many things. But if we have a new chance to reset, where do you think we should start? Because the eastern side of the world will point back the fingers being pointed to them by EU, for example. But you had your chance. 100 years ago, you cut down your forests and you had the growth and you have the GDP that you have now. We are just starting to do it, and now you're blaming us for wanting to go where you are. So this would never appease anyone. But what should be the new discourse? What should be the new points if we could hit reset of having all, having the growth, having the wealth creation, and having the ability to reward sustainable practices? Because right now, in between countries even, it's like I'm blaming you and you blaming me.
Yeah. You've been cutting down trees for a bit longer than that, by the way. It does go back quite a long way. But look, here's the reality. Malaysia actually still can claim that it's got about 50% of its land still forested. That's probably not quite the case, because a lot of it is being encroached on and isn't properly protected. But look, it's a huge amount of its land that is still protected forest, with all the biodiversity benefits and with all the climate benefits. Because just to spell that out, every hectare of forest is a lot of CO2 still in those trees. Malaysia's got tons more forest than the UK has got. So I recognize how indignant people get when they suddenly are being lectured by environmentalists from Europe saying you don't have any right to use your natural resources. Because that doesn't sound fair. It doesn't sound just. The truth is, however, we've got to stop cutting down forests anywhere in the world, and we've got to actually plant a lot more trees. That is in the interest of the whole of humankind. For this to work, the new international settlement would mean that we in the rich world would have to acknowledge the importance of these forests in developing countries still, emerging countries. I mean, Malaysia's a pretty sophisticated country now, so it's not quite that we're dealing with poor countries here. We're dealing with countries that have already established a significant level of economic success. But if Malaysia's forests are a benefit to the world, which they are, then the world has to make it easier for Malaysia to continue to develop without cutting down its trees. So for me, it's a very simple deal. The palm oil industry in Malaysia is incredibly important to the future of this country. It needs to continue to grow and prosper without cutting down any more forest. But the quid pro quo for that is that Europe has got to understand that this is an industry that can behave responsibly, ethically, sustainably, is already demonstrating its ability to do that. And introducing arbitrary protectionist policy measures to damage Malaysia and Indonesia is really pretty stupid.
I thought when we had RSPO, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, that could be a great start that could grow and grow. However, many are seeing that only existing as an alternative niche rather than an industry-wide standard.
Well,
why do you think it's so?
I actually really admire the work that the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil has done, because if I look around the world, every single big commodity crop needs to broker some of these solutions. They need to mediate between the growers and the environmentalists and the governments and the media and academics and so on. And the RSPO, in my opinion, is a real success story. Unfortunately, the volume of oil, palm oil and palm kernel oil that is sold in the world today, the percentage that is certified as being sustainable is still far too low. And that's because not enough people in the West are buying it, because certified palm oil does cost more than conventional palm oil, CPO, without the certified bit. So it's very clear to me, if we as citizens of the world want to have the natural assets of the world managed sustainably, then we must understand you have to pay for that. That does not come for free. In order to maintain a palm oil plantation properly, sustainably, to do all the farming interventions you need to do around fertilizers, around pest control, around maintaining the water table, all that kind of stuff, that is a cost. And that is then recognized by certification through the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or now through the MSPO, the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard. And those costs should be paid for by consumers in every purchasing country, whether that be India, China, America, Europe, whatever it might be. So it's part of this transition that you were sort of troubling away at there. How do we evolve our ideas about wealth in such a way that we protect the natural wealth and pay the proper price for this kind of new prosperity?
I feel that palm oil is also caught not just between the West and the East, but it's also about inequality. Because a lot of, yes, Malaysia is now a sophisticated nation. Indonesia is growing very fast too. But a lot of that wealth is concentrated, not equally spread out across. So we had a land scheme plan decades ago. It's known as Felda here and also Felcra. And the crop has migrated majority to palm oil. So most of people who needs this, thousands of families, hundreds of thousands we put in Indonesia, they are directly impacted by a single decision done by EU, for example. So hence here we're crying about making sure the baby has milk to be fed. At the other hand, we are protecting the heritage of the world, no more
Yeah.
trees should be cut. But I believe that you have always straddled in between, trying to make real practical sense. So now I'm going to go there, and I think rather than draw better lines, because we believe majority population of Malaysia are moderate people, what is a moderate platform? Because you started so many things, you know, but you're very consistent on talking about sustainability. So is there a middle ground away from these battles and war? Because we only have one Earth. The young people want this. So there's only a few blocks left but they are very tough blocks to get over, and we can do something.
There is a middle ground, and it is available to us if we start moving fast towards it. So we've been talking about land-based industries here in our discussion so far, agriculture and forestry and so on. But in all of these big, important sectors, whether you're talking about steel production, the built environment, buildings, for instance, or shipping or aviation, we can continue to benefit from the wealth that those big sectors create, but we have to do it differently. We have to do it by stopping the negative impacts they have on the environment, and to some extent the negative impacts they still have on people. And this is the nature of the revolution that we find ourselves in. Nobody wants to stop increased prosperity. There are a lot of very poor people still on this planet, and we cannot ignore the needs of poor people on this planet and simply say, oh, that's not relevant any longer. We have to protect the environment, so you're going to have to stay poor forever. That is never going to work. There isn't a country in the world today that would say, yeah, we're going to keep our people really poor so we can protect our environment. That's not viable. So we have to put the environmental cause at the heart of creating prosperity more fairly, more equitably for more people in each of these countries. And you might say, which country is doing that well? Well, it's controversial, but you could look to China and you say, China has actually lifted more people out of poverty than any other nation in the history of humankind, faster than most people can even imagine. It has paid a very heavy environmental price for that. The pollution has been just terrible. But now, in China, they are beginning to focus on how do you keep the prosperity and the social stability that prosperity brings, but without trashing our environment. How do we make it possible for people to trust the water they're drinking, to be able to walk out into the streets and breathe properly, rather than thinking that every time they take their child out in a buggy, they're going to be asphyxiated around the block. So it's a historical thing, and I'm looking for all these examples of countries that are now saying, okay, we want the prosperity, but we've got to generate it differently, and we've got to do this very, very quickly, because we've built up a lot of ecological debts in the last 3 or 4 decades.
How do we get past the politics? We've seen how the United Nations Security Council struggle with real wars. But if climate change and disasters and great disasters are not security matters, I don't know what is.
Absolutely.
So, what hope do you have again? I keep on going back to hope, because this is a young, new Malaysia, just 1 year over. There's a lot of hope still. And people want to be proactive and do something. Gone are the days when they wait for government or a leader to do something and rally behind it. They want to do things themselves, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, whatever else. So what would be your one advice to especially those who are empowered, who are proactive, and they really want to make a change regardless of what and who their political leaders are?
That's why I am more hopeful now about the influence of young people than I've ever been before, because they are empowered by information, they're empowered by connectivity, so they're not just operating in isolation. You know, when I joined the Green Party in 1974, the best thing I could possibly do was go down the pub and join the other 6 members of the Green Party as we drank a pint of beer. Well, you don't have to do it like that these days. You're instantly connected, literally, globally, to hundreds of millions of people. There's a pretty astonishing statistic that by 2025, there will be 2 billion people on this planet below the age of 20. Just think about that.
That's a lot.
That's a big percentage of the total human population. And guess what? Pretty much all of them will be connected.
Yes.
Because even in poor countries, the first thing that you aspire to is that ability to connect with networks, with these global things. So I'm looking at that demographic, as they describe it, and I'm saying, whoa, politicians had better watch out. Because young people aren't seeing the world in the same way as you did.
I can't resist this question. So this populism that is going around the world like a viral fever, from Brexit to the right wing in America, look at the verbal wars between President Trump and all the presidential candidates of the Democrats, for example. You still have hope that we can get through all this. You still have hope that the young will somehow find mechanism to cut through all this noise and clutter that's not helping. For example, if we can't even agree on gun control, which is very interesting for me because New Zealand took a very fast proactive step when the tragedy happened. But in America, where you think would be more sophisticated and advanced. So if that can't be solved, I get it that the young have hope, the young can amass themselves. But we, both mine and your generation, who have failed to stop that thing called climate change, what can we do to align ourselves and give the young more hope and chance?
Well, we certainly have some obligations, responsibilities in that department, that's for sure. But I do still think that we have a chance to cut through all of that. You're absolutely right. I mean, if you look around the world politically, and you mentioned a few of them, but you could bring in many more.
Yes.
And we're particularly worried about Brazil.
Understood.
With Mr. Bolsonaro as the new president, now
the Amazon,
initiating a terrible new wave of deforestation in the Amazon, infinitely worse than anything happening here in Malaysia or Indonesia, but that's another matter. So you can look around the world and you can say this is not a good background against which to be doing the difficult politics of climate change, of biodiversity, of justice, for instance. But when I listen to some of the young leaders today, I can see that they have a completely different way of summoning up the creativity in young people. They know we've got these solutions. So take the issue of food, for instance. We can't go on eating the amount of meat that we eat in the world today. We know we have to move away from meat-intensive diets to diets more based on plant-based proteins and so on. Who's leading that revolution? Young people. Absolutely insisting that now we should have access to healthier food with less of an impact on other animals for welfare reasons and on the environment. If I look at the issues about transportation, young people can see that you can't just go on clogging up cities more and more with more and more cars. We have to have a much better mixed transport service. Who's leading that revolution? Young people. If I look at individual leaders, you mentioned New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, astonishing role model for all aspiring politicians in the world. One of the most charismatic, incredibly inspiring politicians we have. You look at the USA, you look at newly elected members of the Congress, you look at this wonderful leadership in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, newly elected, different quality of leadership. You look at Greta Thunberg, who you mentioned in your opening comment. I do have to point out, by the way, to some of your viewers that I have mentioned all of these names. They are all women. And there is a bit of a story emerging here that the new quality of leadership in the world today is being driven very predominantly, very powerfully by women's voices around the world. And there's something of a message there for older male politicians,
cigar-smoking politicians,
who may well find their era is coming to an end.
Is that why you, from New Zealand, you flew straight to America and didn't drop by UK and mention Boris Johnson, for example?
Dude, I hope we're not going to have to go there, are we?
Okay, that will be for another day.
That could be for another day.
But you do have hope for the future. We can beat
I do. I really
climate
do.
change.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jonathon Porritt, for making time. Thanks to you for watching. Thanks to Sime Darby Plantation. This has been a very interesting interview, but I'm sure we'll get Sir Jonathon Porritt to be on our show again the next time we welcome him as a very much welcome guest to Malaysia. See you in another episode very, very soon. Goodbye.